it was a freezer full of all of these delicious like meals for these professional boxers. Like, but the bear seemed to be attracted only to the spaghetti and meatballs. So now we know bears are partial to spaghetti and meatballs.
Awesome. Well, I'll try not to leave spaghetti and meatballs around when I go to my husband's
Yeah.
family cabin at the very top of Wisconsin.
Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm one of your two hosts for this show, Jamie Hopkins, joined by Anna here today. Anna, great to see you. How's everything going over there in Denver?
Great to see you too, Jamie. Everything in Denver is lovely. It's nice and warm. Spring is coming. I'm happy to be alive and feeling okay.
Right, you're a little under the weather today, so I'll be dry
Just
today.
a little bit.
But it sounded like your mom got you like a whole bunch of really cool remedies, iron potion stuff. So
Yeah, we can dive into those. Barbara, do you have any great cold remedies?
My favorite combo is pop vitamin C and echinacea. I do lots of continuing education, including nutrition for my clients. And 900 milligrams of echinacea is the dose. And if you take it at the very first symptoms of a cold, then it can knock the cold back and either get rid of it entirely or make it much less severe. But you have to knock it in
Awesome.
as soon as you start to feel that scratchy throat or itchy nose.
Do that next time. I realized I jumped the gun.
well,
Go ahead, Jamie.
there we go, Barbara Kay joining us today, and I've gotten to know Barbara over the years a little bit as a great coach and coach for the FPA. A lot of the members there, just in this industry and throughout. So really excited to have you on the show today, and get to dive into some fun topics here. Barbara, for those who haven't met you or heard about you before and what you do, maybe the 30 seconds of your approach to the world.
Okay, well, I call myself a business psychology and productivity coach because my background is clinical psychology, and all my clients are in financial services at this point, either financial professionals, teams, leaders. As you mentioned, I do a lot of work with the FPA as well as large-scale enterprise organizations. So I have clients from New York City to Alaska, literally.
I love that. Are they in like a big city in Alaska too? Is it Anchorage or are they just
Anchorage.
okay? Yeah, this so I know a couple. I've known a couple of financial professionals from Anchorage before, so that's good. That's a solid city. Have you been there?
Not yet. My clients have a cabin in the woods, which they happen to enjoy, but they tell me there's no running water. So they have an outhouse and they have to watch out for bears when they go out and use the outhouse. So I say, enjoy that vacation environment. I would rather go to the beach.
Yeah, I'm with you, Barbara. That's not my jam. I mean, I like cabins in the woods, as I've said on the show before. That's my dream to just be, but with running water in New Mexico, not so cold, nice and warm.
Well, I like the movie Cat was it Cat Woods. I thought that was an interesting take on a movie. And then we've had a really funny bear story on the show before though too. So Terrence
We
Crawford's bear
have,
story was really,
yeah.
really funny. So it like broke into their house, Barbara, and ate all the food and then like left a really big poop on the floor.
on the on the driveway, and he like it was a freezer full of all of these delicious like meals for these professional boxers. Like, but the bear seemed to be attracted only to the spaghetti and meatballs. So now we know bears are partial to spaghetti and meatballs.
Awesome. Well, I'll try not to leave spaghetti and meatballs around when I go to my husband's
Yeah.
family cabin at the very top of Wisconsin.
Yes, just don't even cook it. That's my advice. So Barbara, tell us about your first money memory.
My first money memory was going on family vacation. I grew up on the East Coast, actually not far from where Jamie lives in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. And my family always went to the Delaware Shore. And my mother was raised during the Depression. As a matter of fact, her father died when she was quite young. And so our money story is one of learning thriftiness. When your parents were raised through the Depression, you know thriftiness. So we went to the beach, and for the first time, I would get actual money in my hand, which was great. That was a treat. And we could buy penny candy or candy at the little local store. And my mother's a retired nurse. And so it was a double treat because we never got candy and we didn't get handed out money. So I got money and candy at the same time, but only on special occasions like vacation.
Oh, that sounds like a dream. Do you remember I think it's Brock's candy, like, they used to have different, bins at the stores, and you could put them in and weigh it. I used to think those were free when I was little, and Jamie accuses me of being a kleptomaniac on the show all the time, but I swear I thought they were free. I'm like, "Why are they out like this if they're not free? They're samples."
You have
But I
you
should
have
probably pay for those now.
stealing stuff at least in 20 episodes, okay? So
Well, my mother has a
Yeah.
story about stealing chocolates as a child, but we won't get into
yeah, those
that.
Yeah, we'll keep the stealing to a minimum on this episode.
stories though. I remember I took a chocolate bar and I remember that was super painful because my mom made me take it back to the store and take it in and
Oh,
apologize. And I don't know what I was, like 6 or 7, but I clearly knew it was wrong to take it because I like hid it, right? So like I knew, but like you put the little kids in that, like you roll them through an aisle of candy to leave, and it's like your height, and you're like, I mean, it's right here. Like, you want me to take this candy
yeah,
because you put it where little kids can grab it on purpose. So it seems like
yep,
it's on.
they do. So other than the penny candies, what was your first big purchase?
My first big purchase was a car in college. And
Mhm,
actually, I purchased the family car. My mother was going to get a new car, and I was a senior in college. And I came to the Midwest, where I'm in Chicago area now, and stayed, and that's where I went to college. And I needed a car my senior year. And because we were a family of 4 children, my mother was just not going to hand me the family car. So, because that wouldn't be
yeah,
fair to the other siblings. And also,
mhm,
our money story is thriftiness and work for what you get. And so I had to pay
mhm.
for the family car in order to take it back to college and use it as my first car. So that was my first big purchase.
So
Did your siblings wanna use it too, even
Uh,
though
they,
you bought it?
I was the youngest. I was the youngest, and then
Uh-huh.
I took it to Chicago and graduated and stayed in the Chicago area, so they wouldn't have even had a chance. 'Cause-
Oh, okay. I'm the youngest of 4 too, Barbara. I didn't know we had that in
yeah,
common. We have matching outfits. We're the youngest of 4. It's a lot of good synergy here.
absolutely, the baby of the family.
yeah,
Yes.
I have a new prop today too. So for people who aren't watching it, but I found this on a YouTube find it. So this was my first piggy bank that I had. Um, I got it. Actually, still
Ah.
has the coins in there too. I gave one to my daughter recently because she lost her tooth, so the tooth fairy gave it to her. But I got this now, so it's going to be joining me in new conversations because I found it. But it was a pretty interesting thing just to find that first childhood piggy bank type thing where you collected money. It has a lot of nostalgia to it, but I'm digressing a lot there. But
That's
Barbara, we've talked about this a little bit before, but I'd love for you just to give us a quick. How did you kind of come into coaching professional advisors and financial service professionals? Because obviously, it's not a direct path based off of your background to where you are today.
Yes. So I wanted to become a psychologist since high school because I took a class, intro to psychology class in high school, and I was hooked. And I went to college to study psychology, and then I went to graduate school and completed graduate school, and then I got a license in the field. And at that point, I pivoted to coaching. And that was way back when coaching was really new. So my entire coaching career, which is over 20 years, has always been in the professional coaching realm. I'm not a life coach in the sense that that some people are coaches, and I moved into the financial services field more by accident than design. It reminds me of what my clients tell me. Maybe one day you get a business owner, and then another business owner refers you, and then another business owner refers you, or a doctor or a dentist. And then suddenly you look around and your practice is like half of these people. So that happened to me. I started to get referred into financial services and then continued to get referred. And then being a sort of psychology, sociology geek, I began to be really interested in the women investor dynamic way before anybody even was really writing about that. I actually think I wrote the first actual full bore book on how to engage women investors. And that was just a curiosity piece for me because I had a lot of these clients who were men, and yet I knew my peers, women, were doing an awful lot with the family finances, and I was wondering how that was connecting. So that just pulled me even further into the financial services field, and here I am.
So, Barbara, how has your background in clinical psychology served you in your role as a coach?
Wow, I can tell you, I use my clinical psych training every single day, all the time, every single day. And after graduate school, I went on and got 3 additional specialties in coaching. So I learned classic coaching through the Coaches Training Institute. Then I got training in business coaching. And then during the 2020 pandemic, I got specialized training in stress coaching. And I use all of those skills all the time because I coach people around the people performance, people achievement stuff, and people are the
Mhm.
same everywhere, and everybody has challenges for themselves individually in the 4 walls of their own head is what I like to call it, as well as working with others. That could be their peers, their partners, their organization, their clients, their prospects. It covers a ton of
Mhm.
areas, and I use it every single day.
I'd love to hear about the stress coaching. Um, yeah, like I think whenever I talked to you last, you probably hadn't gone through that yet or finished it. Maybe that's not true, but either way, I'd love to hear about like what comes from that. Like, what are some of the tips or what are some of the things you've learned to put into practice with some of your clients?
Well, I've been studying this a long time. The first book I wrote was all how to manage change. And then I just continue on the neuropsychological resiliency training. So I would say mental fitness and resiliency is something that everybody can employ. Uh, the very first tip I would say would be, manage what's going on in the 4 walls of our own head. Because
Mhm.
we often create our own stress by the way we interpret or perceive a hard event. So, the difference between stress and trauma and resilience in the literature is actually how you receive, interpret, and then deal with that event. So, there's an awful lot I could say. So, Jamie, help me out here. What do you want to hear?
Well, I think we'll just follow through on that one. So, the, you're saying like how you kind of receive and interpret and deal with an event. Are there any ways that you can shift that? And I've got maybe I'll go into a story about that, but like, um, an advisor has somebody leave. We'll just, and one of their key stakeholders is leaving, right? And that puts them in a super stressed area. Maybe income's leaving, somebody they relied upon and felt a super emotional connection to is now gone. They're in a total moment of stress. Yeah, how do you deal with that then? Like it's kind of a scenario based question, but I'm sure you've seen that exact situation occur.
Yes.
Mhm.
So human beings are automatically inclined to go to the worst case scenario in our heads. They look at that and they might say, this is terrible, this is awful, terrible things are going to happen. So they tend to get very pervasive about how they perceive it. They also tend, meaning we human beings, get very personal. It's my fault often, or else they're pointing the finger at somebody else, and we end up going extreme in our head, and we lose perspective that it's not the end of the world. And so we end up spinning in our head with all of these terrible thoughts. And sometimes they're very subtle. I do a lot of technically called cognitive restructuring with people. That's the fancy psychology term for it. But you actually need to pay attention to the subliminal thoughts that are what I call flying across the bottom of your mental screen, sort of like the CNN
Hmm.
trailer, or the MSNBC
Triggers.
trailer, or whatever news show trailer. And you'll find, if you pay attention, if you sort of take your focus and kind of think about what are the thoughts that are flitting across my brain, if you take a piece of paper and you just capture those when they go like shooting stars across your brain, you're probably going to find that they're really extreme. There tend to be all or nothing. And people are not nice to themselves. They say the most
No.
awful, toxic things to themselves inside their own heads. And when you write those down and you see them on a piece of paper, you realize, oh my gosh, I have been dripping this horrible toxin across my brain. No wonder I feel awful. And so the first step in cognitive restructuring is to notice the little thoughts, the little voices in your head, and pay attention to them because they're probably not helping you.
Is the second step to light that piece of paper on fire so no? Because I feel like that's part of this.
The second step is to find someone who can help you process that, which happens to be me, or another good coach, or someone who understands that cognitive restructuring technique. And then you walk through a way to get perspective. Usually, that thought feels true, but it is actually not true. So the first question you would ask yourself is are these thoughts 100% totally true? Like, no doubt 100% true. Often they feel true, but they're not 100% true. And then the second question you ask yourself is, are these thoughts helping me or are they hurting me? And even if you're kind of persuaded that they feel true, undoubtedly you'll realize these thoughts are not helping me. They're making me feel depressed and anxious, and I'm reactive and all these things. And then the final step, and this is the challenging step, the final step is to craft a what I call new mantra, a replacement for that toxic thought pattern. And the synapses in your brain, it's wonderful that we have functional MRI imaging and we can actually see what's happening in the brain. The synapses in the brain are like cutting a path across the field. I don't know, when you were growing up, if kids were going to school and they cut a path across the field, pretty soon there was no grass, there was dirt. And your brain operates like that. So those toxic thoughts have burned a path across your brain. And the only way you can get rid of them is to create a new thought pattern and create and burn a new path. So the last step is to create a new mantra. And then every time you feel your brain going to that toxic path, you literally have to stop yourself and then say, nope, nope, I'm going to think this. Nope, I'm going to think this. If you do that consistently, and I mean consistently with discipline, you will retrain your brain. And can I tell a story?
Mm-hmm.
Please
There was
do.
a time I got weird about flying. My children were younger and I was flying and I was leaving my family, and there's nothing more frightening than feeling like I'm going to die in a plane crash and my children are going to be left. And I have a lovely husband, but they were going to be without a mother. And I got weird about flying. And I thought, I need to change this pattern. I need to change this weirdness about flying. And I did cognitive restructuring on myself. And literally in one afternoon, I completely eliminated my fear of flying. I've never been afraid since.
Well, I might have to try that. I still don't like flying, Barbara. I'm not a fan and I don't enjoy it. But yeah, I do it a lot, but I'm not a big fan.
Yep. And the important technique with the cognitive restructuring is to find a mantra that works for you. It has to feel completely authentic, because you're not going to believe your own PR. If it doesn't feel authentic, it will not work. So people will ask me, well, what should I think instead, Barbara? I'm like, I can't tell you that. Here, based on what you're telling me, it sounds like this, or this, or this might be a more accurate viewpoint, but you have to find the mantra that just feels in your heart and soul like, okay, I will believe this if I tell myself this.
Yeah.
Because then if it's not authentic, that unleashes a whole nother barrage of negative, like, oh, you fake, and all.
Yeah.
And you start thinking all kinds of other things.
Yeah. We don't believe our own PR.
No.
We're too smart for
And,
that.
and
all.
Anna, so oddly enough, I got down a rabbit hole this morning. I was on a train, and I know why, but I started looking at like, and Barbara, you probably know some of this research about like relationship stuff, and I was thinking like, um, I just had this notion. I was like, well, it feels like women actually talk more about their relationships to others than men do, which actually is apparently super true. Men hold a lot of that more. But then there were like, some of the research was saying that like that notion of if you start talking negative about your spouse, what tends to happen is that you actually struggle to love your spouse as much afterwards. Even if the stuff was kind of hyperbolic at first, you kind of start creating this negative aspect around them, and then you feel fake, like what Anna just said, which triggered that, right? And then you don't like the relationship as
Mhm.
much because now you feel like you're being fake in some aspect of your life. And it was just a really interesting, I mean, I went way down a rabbit hole in that stuff today, but I find that stuff always really interesting in the sense of relationships and those dynamics and how we interact and how our behavior and the things we say or think influences then how we feel.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting. It's
the
Go ahead, go.
cognitive restructuring whole foundation is what you think drives your feelings, which drives your behavior. And so if you have a what they call negative cognitive set, that's the fancy psychology term, negative cognitive set, then you're going to it's like you've put a negative lens over your everything. So if you end up getting a negative cognitive set around a personal relationship, your spouse, your loved one, your family, your child, your parents, then it colors everything you do and tends to make us more triggered. So this has we saw this in COVID. People's stress levels just kept going up and up and up and up. And
Mhm.
speaking of planes, Jamie, then they got on planes and did insane things because their anxiety and frustration was such on a hair trigger. They had created an easily triggered brain, and it didn't take anything, and they went boo, and they went off. So a lot of this trauma and stress coaching is how to ratchet the brain back down so that you're not on a hair trigger all the time. And we have control over that. It doesn't always feel like that when our brain is overwhelmed with emotion, but we have a lot of control over that. And I have a whole bunch of information on how the brain works, and it's too much for today's podcast.
We'll have to schedule another episode then. So, in terms of the relationship dynamics and when advisors are looking for a coach, like what are some things they should look for to ensure the relationship is successful and fruitful for both people?
Well, that's a really great question because the term coach is as broad as the term financial advisor. Everybody who's listening to this knows that the term financial
Mhm.
advisor can mean a boatload of things, and coach has become to mean a boatload of things. So I like to tell people there's a continuum of coaches. On the one end is the pure facilitative coach who has all wonderful skills in facilitating and coaching, but doesn't bring any subject matter expertise. They don't guide you, they don't advise you, they don't add any tools or tips for you. On the other end of that continuum is the consultant who really calls himself a coach but is primarily a consultant, and the coaching is really following the consulting advice. And so for people who are looking for a coach, I would say figure out what you want. Do you want someone who's going to direct, guide, advise, and tell you what to do, and your job is to be the student and listen? Or do you want someone who's going to be collaborative and help you create a solution that's unique to you? So you need to figure out what you want. And then when you talk to coaches, I would ask 3 questions. Number one, ask them their coaching style. How do you approach coaching? If I were a fly on the wall watching you coach, what would I notice? And oh, by the way, that was a really coachy question to ask. So have a coaching approach because coaches ask those kind of questions. Then number two, ask them about their subject matter expertise. Where is their experience and expertise coming from? I'm really open and transparent about my background as clinical psychology. I'm not training anybody on how to be a wealth management professional. That's not why they're hiring me. So ask about their subject matter expertise. And then thirdly, ask how does your style and your subject matter expertise combine together to work in the coaching? What will I experience as a client? And I think you'll then get a picture of where they fall on the continuum of 100% facilitative to 100% consulting. I would say that in financial services, many of the coaches lean towards the consulting side. I live in smack dab in the middle. I cannot talk to someone about how to do the technicalities of their wealth management, but I have lots of people oriented tips and tools to offer them.
I love,
Does that make
yeah,
sense?
it's really
Absolutely.
good way to lay it out. And yeah, I had when I stepped into our coaching company, the very first kind of thing I took was I took all the inbound calls from advisors, like looking for coaches, which was a super useful way to learn about the coaching business because, I don't know, I did 100 and some of those my first year. And like, I'm setting up the meetings and doing calls and trying to sell coaching. And I'm sure my first like five were terrible, right? Just like awful. And then it's like, but some of those things that like that's what a lot of times we'd have somebody looking at three different coaches and I'd be like, but like what are you trying to get out of it? Like because our coaching, we end up in that, in different spaces for different people, but like we're a super practice management driven organization. I mean, that's really what our coach team does really well, right? We know how to run a financial, a financial planning advisory practice, but we're not like trained psychologists, so we're not good at that side, right? And we're not also super prescriptive. And some people are looking for like, I want a 10-week program, and if that's what you want, then you need to find that. And a lot of people don't know what they want, so it's you're in that kind of consultative moment there. And then I also think, do they just jive with the personality and energy of the coach? Because I assume that you sometimes get somebody that wants you as a client and you're probably sitting there being like, I don't think I want to work with this person.
Well, I give everybody time without charge for just talking about coaching, and so I say, we're going to schedule a time. It can be 30 minutes, it can be even 60 minutes if you need that much time. You're going to talk to me about what you want out of coaching. I'm going to tell you about the whole coaching field. I'm going to ask you some questions about helping you discover what you want and the style that you want. You can ask me anything, and then at the end of that time, we'll have a good idea of whether I'm a good fit for you. And if I'm not a good fit for you, there are many wonderful coaches out there. All the coaches in Carson Coaching, I'm sure, are wonderful. There are many wonderful programs out there. It, it's My coaching is like hiring a sports psychologist that athletes do. I'm not teaching them how to do their sport, but I'm helping them be better. So I use the analogy of like being a sports psychologist, and that's a very close collaborative relationship. So I don't want my client to be unhappy. I want them to really know what they're getting and then say, yes, this is exactly what I want. I've had clients for 10 years that I've just walked beside them as their career has developed. Sometimes people hire me and say, well, I want a very specific, discrete thing. And I'm like, okay, great. When you're done with that, off you go, blue ribbon and great. It all depends on what they want. And so that conversation, Jamie, that you're now having and other people are having about how to find the right fit is really important.
And it's similar to the advisor-client relationship too, like finding, like Barbara, we talked about this last week when we connected before this call, so that's an interesting similarity between the two relationships. But even no matter where they fall on the spectrum that you just mentioned, how can coaching benefit financial advisors?
Oh my gosh, so many different ways. So the first one is objectivity and perspective. Somebody once told me, you can't read the label from the inside of the jar. And the inside of the jar is our own profession, our own practice. We have no objectivity about it. We have no perspective. So the first big thing that a coach gives is objectivity and perspective that you can't get when you're in the middle of everybody, and middle of your practice. And oh, by the way, I can't coach myself because I don't have objectivity about myself. So that's number one. Number two is often the subject matter expertise that they might bring. Just like you said, Jamie, my clients tend to be very experienced. They don't need somebody to teach them how to do wealth management. They're coming for my subject matter expertise. And so that's another thing that coaches provide. The other thing, at least in the way I do coaching, is 99.9% of my clients hire me directly. The organization doesn't hire me, they hire me. And as a result, my sole agenda is their best interest. I'm not their partner, I'm not their peer, I'm not their employee, I'm not their family, I'm not their boss. My sole goal is to advocate for them. And in most other relationships, people have some other agenda that might be conflicting with your goal. So that's really powerful about coaching, is the coach is advocate for you and doesn't have another agenda. And then lastly, at least in the way I do coaching, I'm the confessional booth, because I'm advocating for them, it's 100% confidential. They can tell me what is really going on. And they tell me a lot of things. And because of that confidentiality, we're really able to work on things that are the true inhibitors of their success. And I think that confidential relationship is super powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And this is awesome. One of the questions we like to, ask before you go, is a little bit, a little bit different, but we always ask people, like, what is the term, like, find your freedom? What does freedom mean to you, Barbara?
Well, I have a psych background and I use it every day. So this might come out differently than some people. So I think of freedom as both personal and practical. The personal freedom is the freedom within ourselves to feel confident, to feel calm, to feel good. So much of us, and myself included, struggle with what's going on in the four walls of our own head. And if we're just stressed and anxious and overworked and burdened, that's not free. So I think number one, personal freedom inside your own self. And then the second aspect of personal freedom is the relationships you have. Do you have good and positive and warm and affirming and supportive relationships? That is super, super important. It frees us up. And if there's conflict or struggle in a relationship, it weighs us down. So that's what I would say for the personal side. And then the practical side is opportunities to do what you want to do. That's very freeing. And we live in the United States, and I'm sure many of the people listening to this have lots of freedoms and opportunities. And then the second part about the practical side is just the resources to do what you want to do. And, my psychology background says, and has proven, although poverty is really horrible and people really struggle in poverty, once people get to a certain level of material wealth, money does not buy happiness. And I'm the first person to say, if the bazillion-dollar lottery ticket showed up in my mailbox, I would cash it and I would take it. And I also know that money does not buy happiness. So resources are great, but the other things I listed above resources are what really drives our happiness in the long run. And that gives you freedom and flourishing as a human being.
Yeah, it's a beautiful and very well thought out answer, Barbara. So it's yeah, I mean, you're incredibly articulate every time you present, speak, talk, work with anybody. So I'm always impressed by you every time I get the opportunity to spend time with you. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time here too. And Anna, any closing remarks from you? If you had anything left.
Um, yeah, well, to that end, to add to what Jamie said, working with you at the Journal, you were one of my favorite writers. No offense, Jamie. You too were one of my favorite writers. But it was always a joy to get and learn from all of the things you would submit to us. So I appreciate all the time and work we did together. And lastly, if people listen to this and want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, Google barbarakcoaching.com. And you can sign up for time to talk to me. You can email me. You can call me. barbarakcoaching.com is where you'll find everything. And there's a lot of resources on the website. So take advantage of articles and blogs and a whole bunch of things that's on there. And that'll give you a taste for my style and my subject matter expertise. Thank you for having me. It's so fun to talk. Thank you.
Absolutely, Barbara. It was a blast hanging out with you again.
Yeah, it's been great. So hopefully we'll see you soon in person somewhere. Are you where are you go? Are you going to any conferences coming up this year?
I'll be at the FBA retreat if anybody's going to be there, and hopefully some other things as well.
Yeah, I believe I'm sitting on a panel there, so I will probably see you at the FBA retreat.
Awesome, wonderful,
that's great.
Thank you so much for having
Anna.
me.
Barbara, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was a fantastic episode. Everybody else, make sure you subscribe if you already haven't so you never miss an episode. And everybody else, right, thanks for listening. Stay safe and healthy.